just for a second, that you were standing outside, right? And you're looking up at the night sky.
Mm-hmm.
For, like, all of human history, the stars have been this ultimate symbol of order.
Yeah.
They're reliable. They follow the immutable laws of physics.
Yeah, exactly.
They act like this giant ticking cosmic clock that humanity has always used to navigate or to, plant crops, to basically understand our place in the universe.
Right.
But what if you looked up one night and instead of just shining, the entire night sky started to blink?
Ugh, yeah.
Like a giant, terrifying neon sign just turning on and off in a pattern that seems like it's just for you.
Yeah.
In an instant, that would completely shatter your entire understanding of reality.
It is, it's a profoundly terrifying premise. And it really goes right to the core of how much our human sanity actually relies on the universe being predictable.
Totally.
Because when the rules of physics suddenly seem broken, when the foundational laws of nature are just manipulated, like some parlor trick panic isn't just an overreaction.
Yeah.
I mean, panic is literally the only logical response you have left.
And that profound existential sense of panic is exactly where we are starting today. So welcome to our latest deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are looking at a massive, completely mind-bending sci-fi epic. We're talking about Netflix's adaptation of The Three-Body Problem.
Oh, it's so good.
It really is. But let me be clear for everyone listening. Our mission today is not just to give you a standard TV recap.
No, we're going way deeper.
Exactly. We're going to look at the absolute chaos it took to get this story onto the screen. We're going to unpack the terrifying real-world physics behind its most gruesome scenes.
Which are intense.
Extremely. We'll look at how you adapt what people called an unfilmable Chinese masterpiece. And incredibly, we're going to dive into a real-world true crime story of corporate betrayal and fatal poisoning that happened right behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's one of those rare instances where the reality of getting the project made is almost as chaotic and, well, dark as the fiction itself.
Unbelievably dark.
But, to really grasp this universe, we have to start with the foundational science of the title. We need to understand the literal three-body problem in classical physics.
Right, because I think a lot of people hear the title and they just assume, oh, it's just a cool, ominous-sounding sci-fi name.
Yeah, like it was made up for a movie poster.
Exactly. But it's an actual centuries-old scientific dilemma. So walk us through it. What exactly is the three-body problem?
Well, it basically all comes down to gravity and predictability. So in classical mechanics, if you have two massive objects in space, let's say an Earth and a single sun, their gravitational pull on each other is entirely predictable.
Okay, so it's a stable system.
Right, it's a stable dance. You can calculate their orbits perfectly into the future. But, and this is the kicker, the moment you introduce a third massive object into that exact same gravitational system, everything completely falls apart.
Really?
Yeah, the math just breaks.
But why does the math break just by adding one more object? That seems, I don't know, it seems like we should be able to figure that out.
You'd think so, right? But it's because of chaos theory. The gravitational interactions become incredibly complex and nonlinear. Each of the three bodies is constantly pulling on the other two, altering their trajectories, which in turn alters the pull again. It creates a system with literally no stable solution.
Wow.
Their orbital paths become entirely unpredictable. So they might be stable for a peaceful era, and then suddenly, with no warning at all, the shifting gravity pulls a sun too close and completely incinerates a planet.
Just random destruction.
Or it flings the planet too far away, plunging it into an absolute deep freeze.
So you are living in a solar system where you literally cannot predict if tomorrow will bring like a beautiful sunrise or if the sun will just expand and swallow your entire world.
Exactly. And that unsolvable real-world physics dilemma is the brilliant premise the author Lee Chicken used to create his alien civilization, the Santi. Because their planet exists in a solar system with 3 suns, they live in constant, unpredictable chaos. They're forced to evolve in an environment where survival requires ruthless pragmatism.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we have an incredibly dense math-heavy premise involving chaos theory and orbital mechanics.
Very light reading.
Right. So how do you even begin to translate that kind of abstract astrophysics, not to mention the multi-generational timelines, into engaging television?
Yeah, that was the monumental and some said impossible task for the showrunners. You have David Benioff and D.B.
The
Weiss.
Game of Thrones guys.
Exactly, who obviously learned a lot about adapting massive, sprawling fantasy from their Game of Thrones days. And they teamed up with Alexander Wu.
Okay.
Their core adaptation strategy was to focus intensely on character. They knew that you can have all the whiz-bang science, the massive visual effects, all the existential dread in the world, but if the audience doesn't care about the people experiencing the dread,
It just feels like a physics lecture.
spot on, the story will just die. So they made a highly controversial structural decision. They took a story that was set almost entirely in China, and they globalized it.
Yeah, they created something for the show called the Oxford Five, right?
Yes.
They basically took distinct characters from across Lou Sixon's 3 books, books that take place across vastly different timelines and eras, I might add, and they condensed them into a single close-knit group of brilliant physicists living in modern-day London.
It's a fascinating narrative shortcut, honestly.
How so?
Well, for example, look at the character of Jin Cheng in the show. She actually takes on elements of 2 very different book characters, Wang Miao from the first book and Cheng Zhen's from the third book.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize they combined characters from different books.
Yeah, in the show, she becomes the primary engine driving the investigation into the mysterious virtual reality game. Then you have Will Downing, whose tragic, deeply emotional storyline with terminal cancer is adapted from a book character named Yun Tianming. And Saul Duran stands in for Luo Ji, a pivotal character who doesn't even make an appearance until the second novel.
And they even added a completely new character, Jack Rooney. He's this wealthy, somewhat cynical snack empire guy who dropped out of physics.
Right, right.
And John Bradley, the actor who plays him, actually mentioned that the creators based the character directly on his own personality.
That's hilarious.
He called Jack the Ringo Starr of the group. Like, no matter how weird or abstract the science gets, Jack is the guy on the inside poking holes in it and making light of the situation.
Which is so important. He provides a much-needed grounding element for the audience.
He does, but, and I have to push back here on this whole globalization strategy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because taking a distinctly Chinese cultural masterpiece and moving the core action to the UK, making the heroes an international mix, doesn't that sound exactly like a dangerous Hollywood trope?
I know what you're saying.
It feels like stripping away a story's unique cultural soul, just to make it more palatable to a Western focus group. Isn't that a massive risk that alienates the original fan base?
It's a very valid concern, and to be fair, it's one the creators heavily anticipated and debated. But if you look at the perspective of the episode director, Derek Sang, he offers a really compelling counter-argument.
Which is?
He pointed out that because the story deals with a literal existential cosmic threat to the entire planet Earth, involving a global cast, actually makes pure thematic sense.
Oh, I see.
An alien invasion shouldn't just be one nation's problem to solve.
Okay, I can see the logic in that. If the whole world is ending, the whole world should be in the room.
Precisely. And crucially, they did not erase the story's Chinese roots. The most deeply Chinese element of the narrative, which is the brutal 1960s Cultural Revolution, was kept perfectly intact.
Yeah, it really was.
In fact, it serves as the absolute emotional anchor for the entire series.
That opening scene is harrowing. We see the young astrophysicist Ye Wenji forced to watch her father being beaten to death during a struggle session. And for listeners who might not be familiar with that term, a struggle session was a horrific practice during the Cultural Revolution where people accused of being class enemies were publicly humiliated, tortured, and often killed by crowds.
Yeah.
Sometimes even by their own students.
It is incredibly tough to watch. But author Lou Sixon was adamant about its inclusion and its prominence.
Why was he so insistent?
Because he explained that this specific historical tragedy was the only realistic way to show a character becoming completely irreversibly disillusioned with humanity.
Wow.
You needed an event so profoundly disappointing, so devoid of human empathy, that a person would willingly invite an alien invasion just to wipe the slate clean.
That makes total sense.
That trauma provides the psychological justification for every single event that follows in the series.
Wow. Okay, I can see the point. You absolutely cannot just transplant that specific deep historical trauma to like 1960s London or New York. It has to be grounded in that real history.
Exactly.
So the Cultural Revolution provided the historical trauma for the fiction. But Lou Sixon kept his promises to the story. In the real world, human betrayal can get just as dark,
Oh, yes, it can.
because the battle to get these books onto the screen produced its own shocking tragedy.
It is a true crime backstory that is arguably as bizarre and dark as anything in the novels.
So where did a story this massive even come from? Was Lou Sixon some high-profile, glamorous author living in a penthouse in Beijing?
Not at all. That's what makes his rise so incredible. Lou Sixon was a computer engineer working at a power plant in Shanxi.
Wait, really? A power plant?
Yeah. He wasn't part of the literary elite. He was secretly writing The Three-Body Problem late at night, sometimes until 1 a.m., on his work computer.
No way.
He even admitted in interviews that he used to physically tilt his monitor so his coworkers wouldn't see his screen, because they all just assumed he was slacking off playing video games.
That is amazing. A guy in a cubicle dreaming up the destruction of the universe.
Yeah.
So how does he get from a power plant to Netflix?
Well, because he was writing out of pure passion for the science, and because the Chinese sci-fi market was quite small at the time, he originally sold the adaptation rights for very little money.
Oh, classic mistake.
Right. He sold them to a couple of idealist filmmakers who quickly realized they were way over their heads. I mean, you can't adapt a CGI-heavy cosmic epic on an indie budget. So the project just stalled for years.
Enter Lin Chi. He was a flamboyant billionaire who made his massive fortune in the gaming industry with a company called Yuzu.
Yep, that's him.
He buys the rights, and he has this grand vision. He doesn't just want a movie. He envisions this massive three-body universe franchise akin to Star Wars.
Huge ambitions.
Huge. And to help manage this colossal undertaking, he hires a man named Xu Yao. Xu Yao comes in as his chief risk control officer, and eventually Lin makes him CEO of the subsidiary, specifically handling the franchise rights.
And, you know, on paper, you couldn't ask for a better partnership. Lin Shi had the capital, the grand vision, the bravado, and Xu Yao was reserved, highly calculated, and possessed the intense legal acumen required to clear up the incredibly tangled web of early copyrights.
Right.
The Chinese media even referred to their partnership as a honeymoon phase when they successfully negotiated the massive global deal with Netflix.
Which sounds like a massive win.
It was. But business relationship, especially when billions of dollars of IP are on the line, can sour. And this one soured deeply.
Sour doesn't even begin to cover it. The risk control officer became the ultimate risk. How does a copyright negotiation escalate to a fatal poisoning?
It comes down to ego, credit, and perceived betrayal. As the Netflix deal was coming to fruition, disputes erupted over management styles and who was actually getting credit for building this empire. Lin Shi began sidelining Xu Yao. He significantly cut Xu Yao's salary and essentially pushed him out of the core decision-making loop, elevating other executives instead.
Ouch.
Yeah. And for Xu Yao, who had spent years doing the grueling legal work to untangle the rights, this wasn't just a business slight. It was a profound personal betrayal.
So he decides to take matters into his own hands in the most horrific way possible. He literally poisoned his boss, Lin Chi.
He did.
He murdered him over a sci-fi copyright war.
The transition from boardroom drama to fatal poisoning is incredibly jarring. And Xu Yao didn't just snap in a meeting, it was premeditated. And the timeline of the legal fallout from this murder is completely eerie.
Unbelievably eerie. The Netflix show, Three-Body Problem, officially premiered to the world on March 21st, 2024. Just one single day later, a court in Shanghai sentenced Xu Yao to death for the murder of Lin Chi.
It's wild.
Imagine that. Millions of people are logging on to stream this massive sci-fi epic, and the guy who helped broker the very deal they're watching is sitting in a courtroom being handed a death sentence.
Yeah.
It's pure insanity.
It really is. And if we connect this absolute real-world madness to the bigger picture, to the creator of the universe, Lou Sixon's reaction is fascinating.
How so?
Well, you have to wonder how he feels about his life's work being surrounded by such tragedy. But he remains remarkably, almost unnervingly, detached.
In what way?
Despite his immense global fame and the billions generated by his ideas, he refuses to move to big cultural hubs like Beijing or Shanghai. He prefers to stay in a smaller, quieter city. He stays entirely out of politics.
Wow.
And when journalists asked him if he regretted selling his rights early on for so little, the very act that basically kicked off this whole deadly chain of events, he simply stated that he made a decision back then and he must keep his promises.
That is some serious stoicism. He's just watching the chaos orbit around him like he's observing a detached physics experiment. But while Louis Sixon keeps his promises in the real world and the fictional universe he created, humanity's promises and alliances are constantly being shredded, sometimes literally. So I want to pivot from the real-world horror to the on-screen devastation. Let's talk about Episode 5, the destruction of the ship, Judgment Day.
Ah, yes. The sequence that has drawn intense comparisons to the infamous Red Wedding from Game of Thrones for its sheer, unexpected, visceral brutality.
It is entirely burned into my brain. So,
Mhm.
to set the scene for you, Mike Evans, the billionaire cult leader, has this massive oil tanker called Judgment Day.
All right.
He's converted it into a floating headquarters for his followers, who essentially worship the alien Zanti. The ship is passing through the Panama Canal, completely unaware that the Strategic Intelligence Agency led by the ruthless Thomas Wade has set a trap,
Mm-hmm.
and they are using the experimental nanotechnology created by the character Augie Salazar to do it. Here's where it gets really interesting. The best analogy I could think of while watching it was an old-school wire egg slicer. But instead of a hard-boiled egg, it's a massive multi-ton steel ship.
That is precisely the analogy the visual effects team used when conceptualizing the sequence.
No way.
Yeah. And what's truly fascinating here is the rigorous attention to the actual physics of how this trap would work. The showrunners didn't just want it to look cool, they wanted it to be scientifically sound. They brought in Dr. Matt Kenzie, a particle physics consultant, to design the mechanics.
Okay, so why did they set it up the way they did? Why not just swing a giant invisible blade at the ship?
Well, Dr. Kenzie explained that if you have these invisible nanofibers materials that are incredibly sharp but unimaginably thin, you wouldn't try to move them. If you try to swing a wire that thin, the tension and friction would warp it or it would snag.
Oh, that makes sense.
Instead, you have to keep the fibers completely static. You tie them tightly between two solid poles across the width of the canal, and you let the ship's own forward momentum push it through the trap.
Right, the ship is moving, but the invisible wires are perfectly still.
Yeah.
And they spaced these synthetic fibers exactly 50 centimeters apart, which is about 20 inches.
Yeah.
Imagine you are standing on the deck of that ship. You're moving forward, but you can't see the weapon. The wires slice through everything. Metal doors, paper dolls, a child's backpack, a heavy fire extinguisher, and then the people. It's
Yeah.
horrifying because you only see the delayed effect of it.
And that delay is the most scientifically accurate and definitely the most terrifying part of the entire sequence.
How so?
The VFX supervisor, Steph Fangmeyer, and the production designer, Deborah Riley, really had to sit down and figure out the structural integrity of a sliced-up oil tanker. They realized that because the cuts were so unimaginably clean and thin, no material was actually removed.
Okay.
So the immense weight of the ship's upper steel layers would actually press down and keep the lower slices perfectly intact.
Held together purely by gravity.
Exactly. Gravity and friction, as long as the ship kept moving smoothly on the water?
So it didn't just instantly fall apart like Lego blocks the second the wires touched it.
Not at all. It wasn't until the ship's forward momentum was violently stopped by running aground on the muddy banks of the canal that the physics finally caught up.
And then it all falls apart.
Only then did the sheer kinetic energy cause the severed layers of steel to slide off one another, collapsing into a heap of shredded wreckage.
That is insane.
And to film the aftermath, they actually built the deck of the tanker at Shepperton Studios out of neoprene-like, a synthetic rubber, so the cameras could fluidly move through the mangled, sliced environment.
That is brilliant and terrifying. And it really highlights that staggering $20 million per episode budget.
Oh, yeah.
You can see every single penny of it in those VFX set pieces and in those wild virtual reality helmet sequences where they recreate Tudor England or the Shang Dynasty. But, for all the grand spectacle, the show is also packed with these incredibly subtle, clever Easter eggs. It really rewards observant fans.
The showrunners definitely layered in details for viewers paying close attention to the screen. What Easter eggs stood out to you?
Okay, I have a few favorites. First, when they finally recover the damaged hard drive from the ruins of that sliced-up Judgment Day ship, Wade's team has to decrypt this massive 10-petabyte file.
Right.
And just for context, 1 petabyte is 1,000,000 gigabytes, so this is an unimaginable amount of data. If you look closely at the computer monitor, the decrypted file is named soften.cxl.
And why is that significant?
Well, first, the file extension, .-tacxl, is the initials of the author, Sixon Liu.
Ah, nice.
But more importantly, the name Soften. For listeners who haven't read the books, a Soften is the ultimate alien plot device. It is a single proton that the Santi have unfolded in multiple dimensions and turned into a sentient supercomputer, which they send to Earth to spy on us and disrupt our science. So naming the file Soften is this huge nod to what's coming.
That is a fantastic, deeply embedded detail.
Right. And here's another one that's a bit lighter. Right after Jack Rooney takes off his literal Alienware VR headset, this incredibly advanced, featureless, shiny metal helmet sent by the Santia. The very next shot shows him gaming on a regular Earthly laptop that is prominently branded with the Alienware logo.
That's great.
It's almost too on the nose, but it cracked me up.
That's the kind of visual irony that adds some necessary levity to a heavy show. But some of the Easter eggs are actually deeply thematic, especially regarding the character of Will Downing.
Yes. Okay, this one is a bit of a spoiler for the later book, so fair warning to you listening. But when terminal cancer patient Will Downing is legally consenting to his euthanasia, the automated machine requires him to physically press the yes button 5 distinct times.
Which seems oddly specific and tedious.
Very. But if you know the third book, it is a brilliant visual foreshadowing. Centuries later, Will uses a highly restricted, high-stakes communication device where he has to be incredibly careful about the prompts he answers, pressing a button in a very specific sequence.
And that is what makes it such a great detail. It shows how meticulously the creators are planting seeds for future seasons.
Definitely.
It highlights the massive gamble Netflix took, planting a subtle narrative payoff in season 1 that might take almost a decade to reach the screen, assuming they get to adapt all 3 books.
It really does show immense confidence in the material. But digging into all this, the international cast, the geopolitical maneuvering, this overarching unseen threat that forces humanity to either unite or destroy itself, it leads me to a bigger question.
Okay.
Is this whole story, at its core, actually just a thinly veiled metaphor for modern U.S.-China relations?
It is a very common interpretation, especially given the current geopolitical climate and the origins of the author. But it is an interpretation that Liu Cixin himself firmly and consistently debunks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He has explicitly stated that his work is not a political allegory in the vein of George Orwell's 1984. He isn't interested in using sci-fi to comment on specific national tensions or trade wars.
Interesting.
For him, the story is purely about humanity as a single, flawed entity and our tenuous place in the grand, terrifying scale of the universe.
So if he isn't worried about the U.S. and China, what does he think is the actual existential threat we should be looking at right now?
Interestingly, he points to a threat much closer to home than an alien fleet. Lua believes that artificial intelligence will be the ultimate force of change for our species.
Really? AI.
Yeah, and he frames it specifically in terms of labor and economics. He predicts that AI could potentially cause a labor disruption 10,000 times larger than the Luddite movement.
Wow. And for context, the Luddite movement was in the early 19th century when skilled textile workers realized automated looms were making their skills obsolete, so they broke into factories and violently smashed the machinery.
Exactly. But Lu sees a future where intelligence and knowledge, the very things that define our current economic value, are no longer exclusive to humans. AI is the new loom, but for human intellect. He believes this will force a complete reimagining of how society functions, far beyond simply losing jobs.
10,000 times the Luddite movement. That is a deeply sobering thought.
It is.
Okay, let's synthesize everything we've covered today because this has been an incredible journey. We started with a power plant engineer, secretly writing a novel in his cubicle, tilting his screen to hide his work. That passion project sparked a massive corporate war, ending in a fatal poisoning of a billionaire. And out of that real-world chaos emerged a $20 million an episode global television phenomenon.
Unbelievable when you say it all out loud.
It really is.
Yeah.
A show that managed to adapt unadaptable physics, globalize an intensely Chinese narrative without losing its historical trauma, and deliver some of the most scientifically accurate, horrifying television spectacle we've ever seen.
It is a true testament to the enduring power of the original ideas. And I'd like to leave you with a final philosophical thought to ponder today.
I'd love that.
Because despite the sheer bleakness of the three-body problem, a story where science is broken, aliens are coming, and humanity is deeply constantly flawed. And despite the real-world murder surrounding its adaptation, author Liu Cixin remains profoundly optimistic about our species.
Really? Optimistic?
Yeah.
After writing thousands of pages about our potential annihilation.
He is. He points out our history. Humanity has survived the Black Death, which wiped out a third of Europe. We have survived 2 catastrophic world wars. We have survived the nuclear brinksmanship of the Cold War.
That's true.
And ultimately, he argues, through all the trauma, we always emerge stronger and more advanced. So the question I want to leave you with is this.
Okay.
In our current age of AI disruption, global anxieties, and rapid, unpredictable change, are we, just like the characters facing the three-body crisis in the show, actually much more resilient than we give ourselves credit for?
That is an amazing thought to sit with. Maybe we are stronger than the chaos. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll keep looking up at the stars, even if you're a little bit more afraid they might start blinking back at you.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next one.